If you've ever heard a deathbed confession, tell me about it. Was there anything interesting in it? When the guy was in the hospital, the one in the bed next to me just asked them to stop giving him medicine, as he was ready to die. The last thing I heard from him at home was that no one was waiting for him, so he was going to go to where they all are. His confession wasn't shocking, but rather heartbreaking in its utter loneliness. My father had Alzheimer's, and eventually he was put in a room under observation. He was blind and almost deaf. One day he was visited by his relatives, but he didn't recognize them. However, he started telling me something. He said that I had achieved more in life than he had and that he was proud of me. He was always a quiet person and never said anything like that to me before. Looking back, I realized that he actually did a lot for me, but I didn't understand it back then. For example, when he retired, his colleagues asked what he would like as a gift, and my father asked for a scientific calculator. This was in the 70s, and it was something he didn't need, but he gave it to me so I could use it at university. I thought he was just handing it to me, not realizing that he had originally asked for it for me. This story isn't mine, but it was told to us by a hospice worker who came to speak to my class. For those who don't know, hospice care focuses on easing the emotional and physical pain of a dying person to help them leave life more peacefully, rather than fighting an inevitable death. One of her patients was a woman in her 90s, mostly unresponsive, although occasionally she would recognize someone or say something. It's difficult to determine to what degree patients who appear unresponsive are actually detached from the world. So, in the hospice, they encourage family members to stay with the patient in hopes that it will have a positive effect on them. This patient was from an American state, proud of its university and its university football team. 4 or 5 generations of her family had graduated from this university. However, while she was in hospice, her great-granddaughter decided to attend a different university, one in a competing state. The family supported her decision but often joked that she was a rebel or a traitor, and such remarks were made in jest. One day, they were all sitting by the woman's bed, teasing the girl about her choice, when suddenly the patient sat up, looked at her great-granddaughter and said, "Traitor," before dying. My grandfather had severe dementia and constantly made deathbed confessions because he knew he didn't have much time left. They were often about witnessing a murder, but he never admitted it to anyone. However, every time he told us this story, the details changed. During the last week of his life, he told the story several times a day. Eventually, we realized that he had seen it on the local news and mistakenly thought he had witnessed it firsthand. I wasn't there at the time, but my aunt's mother fell down the stairs in front of him, and just before dying, she confessed that she was not her biological mother. She told my aunt that her real mother was her older sister, who had gotten pregnant too early. Back then, many people did such things. She revealed this on her deathbed. My grandfather confessed to me, and to no one else, that he had accidentally had sex with a man. My shining moment. For 14 years, I worked in a hospital in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, a small town near Munich. My job wasn't complicated. I translated for people, took out the trash, and sometimes fixed things like leaking showers. As you can imagine, I met many patients who came and went, and some of them died. I think that's life. I remember several cases where people confessed to me what they regretted most. Here are a few examples. An elderly Polish woman told me she regretted not sleeping with Hitler when she had the chance. I wanted to ask her more about the context, but honestly, I was afraid. Another memorable confession was from an old truck driver who used to work for Easter Johnny. He told me that once, while driving his truck, he ran over several children but was too scared to stop and check if they were okay. Once, another Polish woman shared that during World War II, she was a prostitute and slept with high-ranking officials in the government. She said she didn't regret that part of her life, but it was emotionally difficult, and she could never tell anyone about it. She also confessed that she had had more than 5 abortions during that time. My partner's grandfather never talked about his service during World War II. We are Australians, and he joined the army as a soldier under a false name and age, so we can't find any records. He was only 16, but we know he fought in the Pacific Theater. When he returned, his lie was uncovered, and by the time he was 18, he was drafted under his real name and soon arrested. He did everything he could to avoid returning to combat, drinking, fighting, and hurting himself. He spent most of his adult life as an alcoholic, a bad husband, and father. However, in his old age, he became softer, especially after the birth of his grandchildren. In his final hours, he relived his war experiences, and some of the things he said were chilling. "God, they're behind us. The Japanese are here. Sir, strike him. Strike him. Expletive. Stab him. Help. Medic." He also constantly muttered various names, reflecting the broken, tortured mind he had. I don't know if this counts as a confession, but it seemed fitting. My grandparents had 3 daughters, and they always said that my mother was my grandfather's secret favorite. He always denied it. On April 6th, I was told he was on the verge of death, and I went to visit him on the 8th. He looked terrible, and the doctor repeated that he couldn't understand how he hadn't died yet. On April 9th, everyone except my mother had the chance to come and say goodbye. She didn't drive, and my dad worked 10 hours away. My grandfather kept calling her name. Well, he couldn't eat or drink, so it was more of an experience. My mom arrived on the 10th, and he looked at her, smiled, and whispered, "My," then closed his eyes and never opened them again. Not exactly a confession, but my cousin and I were in a car accident, and he didn't survive. His friends constantly pressured him to steal and vandalize. He ended up in prison 4 times because of them. When we were in the hospital and he was dying, the last thing he said was, "Well, if I end up in hell, I'll be with all my friends. Love you. I have an amazing story." My great-grandmother lived a very long and interesting life during the Great Depression. She was in her 20s during those years. She had a wild life about which we know very little. We don't even know the name of her first husband, just her second one, who appeared later. Throughout her almost century-long life, she collected soft, literally thousands of items featuring owls. She had clocks, tapestries, potholders, lamps, stained glass, and more small statues than you can imagine, all owls. We always wondered why they were so important, but she never said. When she was close to death, at 98 or 99 years old, the doctors said she had only a few days left. My grandparents asked her if she wanted to share anything or ask something before she left us. She paused for a moment and then said, "I never understood all those owls." Turned out that she didn't care about them at all. If we can properly guess, sometime in the 40s or 50s, she bought either a trivet or a salt and pepper set in the shape of owls. Then someone gave her another one. These were the oldest owls she could remember, and after that, someone gave her yet another owl-themed item, and suddenly her kitchen was full of owls. From there, everything snowballed, and for the next 60 years, they became a prominent part of her possessions. The moral: if you don't like something, say it right away. When I was little, my mom ran a nursing home, and I spent every weekend with the residents. Since I was a kid, they often confessed things they thought I wouldn't understand. 2 stories stand out, one funny, the other not so much. A 96-year-old woman, who was dying, even had a last burst of energy when she thought she was feeling better. A delivery man arrived with flowers, and after he left, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I can't believe I'm dying without ever having been with a black man." The second story happened when I was reading Bible verses. The person said, "It's a pity. I didn't want to throw that child in the well. My cousin's wife passed away a couple of years ago. She had viral encephalitis and was drifting between consciousness and oblivion. It was painful to watch. In her final days, many family members tried to be with her. One day, I was alone with her, and she made some rather strange remarks, which I have kept to myself ever since. That day, I was playing on my phone in the hospital room when she started mumbling loudly to herself. Her voice became more insistent and tense. It became clear that she was calling for me. Her eyes looked huge and confused, and I'm not sure she knew who I was. She was forcing out words, most of which were barely understandable, with a special emphasis on the boy and the ingredient. I sat next to her for 15 minutes, listening to her disjointed explanation. As I finally understood, she was talking about cooking eggs in a boy's urine instead of water. She insisted that he was well compensated for his services but occasionally started crying and couldn't stop. A few weeks later, I Googled it, and it turns out that in China, there is indeed a traditional dish known as virgin boy eggs. She was fascinated by the concept and often recreated the recipe, sometimes serving it to her family, which included me when I was younger, though she never told anyone what it was. I don't know whether she felt ashamed or excited. She kept hinting at the secret ingredient. It clearly haunted her until the end of her life. My grandmother, on her deathbed, confessed to a murder. Could have been the painkillers talking, but she was such an eccentric woman that it sounded pretty plausible. We traced all her ex-husbands, partners, and potential candidates. Fortunately, no one had gone missing or died prematurely, but sometimes I wonder. After World War II, a young German woman named Felice, whose family lived in France, was given many thoughtful gifts, including a large, juicy piece of ham for her family. They married, but after several miscarriages and infertility, they stayed together without children. When Felice was on her deathbed in 2010, she said to her husband, "Felice, I always liked you, but I never loved you. Thanks for watching, and if you've ever heard a deathbed confession, share it in the comments. Was there anything interesting in it? Don't forget to check out our other videos. Bye."